Welcome to today's episode of Reach. We're going to be talking about food textures, food sensitivity, and ARFID. Yes, so today's episode we were talking about food. So, yes, growing up on the spectrum in my house, it was a house of three boys who all couldn't agree on food, and it drove my parents nuts.
I can definitely understand that. I grew up with two older siblings, and, when it came to cooking in general, it was more like, my parents would give us what they had in the house. But the thing of it is that the food that my parents would give me is not necessarily what I wanted because I was very picky when it came to the food that was given to me. For example, my dad one time cooked Chef Boyardee ravioli, and he made it seem like it was the greatest thing in the world. And for me, no. So if I didn't eat something that he cooked, whether it be that or the multiple courses of food that he would give just to quiet me, it wasn't going to happen. I wasn't, he was a very mean person and he would make me feel guilty because I didn't eat his food.
I know for me, growing up, it was tough because my dad very much came from a house of, you eat what's given to you just because it was all they had. And so he carried that into my childhood. I just always remember feeling a lot of guilt because my mom would cook, like find recipes online and cook from scratch and spend like an entire evening in the kitchen. I just couldn't eat it. Uh, I'm a big texture eater for the most part, so I always like core memory, I guess. Meatloaf, I can't ever do, can never do because it just doesn't feel right.
We were told we were stubborn. My parents, they both grew up in houses where it was like eat was on your plate, but they didn't want that in our house. So they were trying to avoid that, but it created a lot of frustration of, okay, nobody could agree on something, so don't know what to cook. So it was always last minute of trying, okay, what are we going to make? And it got to the point where I started learning how to cook for myself, but I understand that like not being able to describe things, like for me it was pot roast. Like pot roast has all those like squishy fatty pieces, and anytime that was in my mouth I gagged.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, and
Mm.
that was always cooked with cooked vegetables too. And that was another thing for me, mushy food. And I couldn't eat that
It's like
either.
there's a consistency between solid and a liquid, and
Yes.
there's a very fine line on whether or not it's like safe.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm right there with you. I know personally mushy and like moist foods that like meatloaf, like what you were saying, Moose, and pot roast, like what you were saying, Conrad, like those for me are not safe foods because they have those types of textures that just make you gag. I know the other day my mom made this hamburger casserole. It was supposed to be representative of a poutine. If you don't know what poutine is, it's, French fries, cheese curds, gravy, and she decided to make it like a completely different version. Instead of gravy, she used Chick-fil-A sauce and she added mushrooms and onions. And I was texting my mom because I was in the middle of an appointment and I was explaining to her, this feels like a nightmare of me eating it. And she and she made it. I know that she worked very hard on it. And she did give me well, it tastes fine to me. It's like, but that's
Right.
you. That's
Cool.
you. That's not me. I cannot eat that because it's a nightmare. Like, it's hard to describe how textures and certain things feel in your mouth when you are eating it.
Yeah, especially when you're younger, it repulses me. Like I could say that now, it just repulses me.
It's one of those things of like looking back at my childhood with the information knowledge I have now. it's like I can't decide, or I can't even decipher whether my tantrums during dinner time were like a straight up just panic attack, or if it was like a meltdown because it was all like sensory and emotion based and stuff like that. I also, so I come from a family of six. I am one of the six. So making dinner and like doing family dinner just didn't happen as often just because we were so busy. I learned how to use a microwave, an oven, and a stove. That's what I learned to do. But, that would also mean we went out to eat, and I still get self-conscious when I order food at a restaurant because if I'm getting pasta, I just want butter and Parmesan cheese. Anything else. That's all I want. And I just
Classic.
remember like my dad always telling the server to get me like, oh yeah, the most boring dish you can get. The
Oh,
most
I've gotten that too. Oh my God.
it's like I just want noodles. That's all I want.
Yeah, I've been told that like I have the most boring taste when it comes to food. Like when I get ice cream, it is vanilla with whipped cream. No mixed textures.
Again, it just goes back to food has to be safe for us. Food has to have, significant meaning. And, if butter noodles is something that we like, who are you to say that we should add all of these other flavors? You don't know what it's like to eat something from our perspective,
Yeah, I just had this conversation with my grandmother where it's like, yeah, you had pizza again for dinner. I'm like, yes, you get all your food groups. You got your bread, you get your sauce, you get your cheese. I put chicken on it, and then I get salad with it. I'm like, there's your food groups. Like, with
There
the
you go.
exception of some
Which
fruit
food groups in
with
a
vitamin
general
C.
sense kind of bogus anyway, but
But then you're like, don't you want to try something different? I'm like, no, I eat to live, not not for enjoyment necessarily. Granted, yes, I have to be able to put it in my mouth. What exactly is ARFID? According to the ARFID Awareness UK organization, ARFID is characterized by a pattern of eating that avoids certain foods or food groups entirely and or is restricted in quantity. For example, eating small amounts. Avoidant and restrictive eating cannot be due to lack of available food or cultural norms. ARFID is different to other restrictive eating disorders in that ARFID isn't affected by a person's beliefs about the size and shape of their body. Someone with ARFID doesn't restrict their food intake for the specific purpose of losing weight. ARFID doesn't feature some of the other behaviors that can be associated with anorexia, bulimia, or OSFID, such as over-exercising. There's a quote from a psychologist, Dr. Harris, on this page. The difference between a picky eater and a child with ARFID is that a picky eater won't starve themselves to death. A child with ARFID will. And according to Psychology Today, ARFID shows, according to research, shows up in up to 30% of individuals who are on the autism spectrum. So definitely a high comorbidity rate with those on the spectrum.
my ARFID got so severe when I was little. I was about 10ish, that I just stopped eating altogether, and they had to hospitalize me. And this was before it was even in the DSM-5. It was before it was even like a thing. So after they, got me enough strength that I could at least like walk on my own and do stuff, they sent me over to the psych ward. And that was an experience. Because they didn't know how to treat me. They were just kind of like taking all the eating disorder stuff, and, like putting it at me of like, well, let's figure out like you need to eat. So a month goes by, finally get out, and I have like this food therapy thing afterwards. Um, and I just remember it was like once a week, and they'd put me in this little room with like a doctor, my mom, and they had like a little chart like thing where you can, I'm like trying to remember, it was like a little like make marks on it or something. And they'd bring a food, and I'd have to like, I'd sit there and I'd have to eat it until some nebulous, I think it was like, it was typically 3 bites, but sometimes, like, depending on the session, they like increase it. Memory is a little fuzzy about it, but I remember they do stuff like, yogurt, granola bar, and it like was not a great experience. So fast forward to now, my therapist has been helping me do some exposure therapy just to, widen my palate a little bit because it's also something I want to do. And that was the key difference that I like realized was like an epiphany of there are foods I will not touch that I did back then, like during that therapy of like yogurt. Yogurt's terrible, hate it, bad. Yogurt, wrong. But it's like now that it's my conscious choice, it's about feeling safe. Because I also know that there are plenty of people with ARFID that are content with staying there. And I get it because it's about waiting until you feel comfortable and you feel like ready because it's already such a neurological thing. If you're trying to force your brain to do something that it is trying to protect you from doing, it's like you're gonna traumatize yourself a little bit in the
Yeah,
process.
you're basically going into it with a bias already, where
Yeah.
if you actually wanted to try it, then you're open to it versus
And
being
I'd
forced to do
also
it.
say, again, for me, we've been doing stuff that is like tangential. So things that I typically have like good memories associated with. I tried beef jerky. And the reason I chose that was because I have just really vivid memories of my dad always eating it in the car during like road trips and stuff. So, like, good, fun memories. So that made it easier to be like, okay, I want to try this because, like, I know what bacon is, I know what meat is. It's just going to be a different texture, but the taste, like salt, it's about finding stepping stones to lead to other stuff. It's also about knowing your limits. Like, I'm never gonna eat escargot or caviar. What is that? No.
Nope, nope. That and frogs.
It's one of
Nope.
those things of like, don't, if you're looking to like broaden your palate, don't force yourself to go to the extreme immediately because it's not gonna open all these doors now because I tried this. What else can I try? It's like, know yourself and understand that familiar and routine are our friends. So take the little steps that are familiar until you're getting to something that ultimately is a big different thing.
I work with a lot of families of children with autism, children with developmental and intellectual disabilities, and they talk to me about wanting to broaden their child's food, like food palette. And I am not diagnosed with ARFID, but I am a very picky eater. And I can imagine how hard that must be for the child to just go through, having to eat certain foods. And that's a really touchy area. I don't like to even focus on that for that reason, because if the child has a lot of, bad memories and feels unsafe eating certain foods, who am I to say that we have to work on this? If they're surviving, if they're eating in general, that's great. And if they're eating and they're surviving and they're doing well in terms of that, to me, that is better than me trying to say, okay, you are going to eat this apple because your mom wants me to get you to eat this apple.
There was a lot of strong arming when I was little, a lot of things being taken away, being punished. I understand my parents and why it happened. I understand the fear. I understand the wanting to do anything you can to like make sure your kid eats. And I understand that sometimes fear and anger are much more powerful emotions and kind of inhibit the ability to take a step back and be like, okay, let me like think about this. So I get it in that sense, but you'd literally hide when it was dinner. Like I remember hiding when it was dinner time, and I knew that it was something I didn't like. If I can give any advice to like parents, um, talking to a child that might have ARFID or like just sensitivities with food in general, I found that watching the food get made helps because knowing exactly what is in it can help sometimes. Because that was the other thing. If you're trying to run your child's perspective, don't be sneaky about it. Don't like hide things and be like, oh, but there was this in it the whole time. Because like,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
for
not a good plan.
yeah, that's a great way to destroy trust.
Right.
And
And the other thing is like know what textures work with your, kid or yourself for adults, because obviously there are plenty of autistic adults out there. Um, uh, it's like eating and food, having ARFID is a lot more difficult than people think, also because they just can't understand just not wanting to eat or caring to eat because it's like breathing, you need to do it. It's hard of like going into adulthood and realizing how much of our culture and stuff is based around meals and drinks and food. It's like you need to adapt. So like my main goal that I'm working on with my therapist is to be able to order a dish from one of each of those places. That way, if, coworkers ask me out, if like my boss has to have a meeting with me, at least wherever they choose, I can have something that I can safely eat in each of those places. It's about finding the similarities and kind of like training your brain to be like, we may not like this, but it's not a like a danger food. It's not a fear food.
I don't know about you two, but for me, like if I go to a restaurant, there's like either one or two things I get there every time. So that way I don't have to think about the menu. I just go, and it gets to a point sometimes that I go to a restaurant and they just know who I am and what I order and don't even ask me.
Dude, that's all I want to be that person of like I go in, like I'll have my usual. Just me.
Oh my goodness. Yes, I've been there myself, and it'll be like, especially when I was younger, chicken tenders, French fries. That
Never
was
go
it.
wrong with it.
Never go wrong. Or if it was like a sandwich place, turkey sandwich, lettuce and
Yep.
mayonnaise. That's it. Nothing else. Don't add any fancy vegetables, don't add any more meat, don't toast it. Turkey, lettuce, mayonnaise, that's it. It's good. And I do that to this day as an adult.
Right.
Because it's a safe food. It's something I grew up with. It's something that I've always felt safe by. And so for me, it's so interesting when there are people who are like, oh, why won't you eat this? Oh, you need to be more open-minded about different foods. It's like, again, you don't know my history. You don't know what it's like. So rather than being judgmental, maybe be a little bit less of a jerk, for lack of a better term. I don't know how to say that
It's
nicely.
food
There's
is
some
so sorry.
go ahead.
Food is just so fascinating because it's simultaneously so social but so personal at the same time. For parents, friends, anyone who's watching this, taking the time to actually just learn about this really kind of niche thing is enough, because then it's at least you're understanding why someone is acting the way they are. It isn't out of stubbornness, it isn't out of pride. It's like, I wish I could just go on a whim to an Indonesian place, but I can't. I just can't do
Yeah, never mind going on a whim because we're on the spectrum.
that.
Carry that.
Fair.
Yeah,
Yes.
just bolstering that understanding, having that dialogue, and being willing to even just reasonably adjust. What about family gatherings of food? Because that is a hallmark tradition for so many different reasons, whether it's celebratory, holidays, you name it. What were those like?
You have the social aspect, which I know this isn't, about food, but it connects. Of like, you've got the social aspect of typically if it's like a Thanksgiving, I'm seeing people in my family that I haven't seen for like 5 years, or that I only see once a year. I don't remember that. And I'm already bad at talking to people. And then you just have the additional, watching your mom and family members spend all day cooking. And it's this big spread of all this stuff, and everyone's, got their plates loaded, and I have turkey with salt. It's unwarranted because, again, it's no one's business, but you can't help but feel embarrassed too when you look over at the kids' table and the kids have more stuff on their plate than you do.
Yeah. At the other side of it, it's like they could be embarrassed because they're like, I made all this food and you don't want to partake of it, hence the guilt
Right.
trip.
It's not that. It's like that's the thing of like, I never want someone to feel guilty or upset that I'm not eating, because it's never a personal slight. It's
Yeah.
But
The
again,
bigger,
because food is such a personal thing for a lot of people.
yeah, the bigger question is, can you control how they feel?
No.
No. With my family, I grew up in an Italian family, so they're like,
Oh
okay, you
boy.
gotta have food. Okay, okay, you don't like this. Okay, we're gonna make you something anyway that you do like. So no matter what, you're gonna have food because we can't have you starving. So
I know
they were nice enough to like, okay, so we're having turkey, you're gonna have chicken. Good. As long as you're eating. Good.
at my house, it's pretty much the same. My mom has gotten better about cooking foods that are safe for me. One of my older brothers used to be a chef, and he cooked all these foods. And granted, he is part of the reason why I've gotten a little bit better with trying different foods, because my brother knows how to make good food. I mean, shout out to Michael, he's a fantastic cook, fantastic chef. But that being said, that doesn't negate how I have this negative relationship towards food.
Yeah. So a lot of my comfort foods are very processed stuff, and safe, and things that have been made since like the 90s. So there's no chance of them going out of business because it's too big to fail at this point. And that's the other thing of like trying to switch to like organic stuff and like eat healthier is really hard, because when your body is essentially trained on processed foods and stuff like that, it's hard not to feel really guilty about yourself when people are like, "Oh, you should eat healthier." And it's like, "Cool. How?" um
There you go, is the how do we get there?
Kids are just as complex as adults are. It's just a matter of finding the vocabulary to express that. And it can be hard because kids tend to be a little more reactive, you know, but meeting them where they are and like trying to help them develop that vocabulary is going to go a long way.
Join us next month for our episode on suicide in the autism community.
Thank you.
Thank you.